The apron was pink, frilled, and already stained from someone else's mistakes. It landed in my hands like a sentence. I was supposed to be sitting in the front pew, my navy silk dress catching the soft light of the sanctuary. But instead, I stood in the church basement with the smell of burnt coffee curling through the air. Upstairs, organ pipes lifted hymns toward heaven. Down here, the faucet dripped in rhythm, echoing against metal pans that hadn't been washed. I carried platters of cheese past guests who whispered behind their hands, their perfume and laughter trailing me like reminders that I wasn't one of them. I had paid for their flowers, their cake, even the photographer whose fee was more than my monthly rent. Yet when vows began, I was told to help in the back. The frills scratched my wrists while I balanced crackers on plastic trays. My son didn't notice I was gone. Tommy laughed at the head table with Sarah's father, the man preparing a speech about gaining a son, the same man who never asked where the mother of the groom had vanished. Through a narrow basement window, I could see them posing under the oak tree where I once pushed Tommy on a tire swing. The camera flash lit his smile, but the lens never turned toward me. I reached into my pocket, fingertips brushing the folded program. Cream paper, gold lettering, flawless print. And nowhere was my name. Sarah's parents were celebrated, her grandmother noted for arranging flowers, her college roommate praised for music selections. My absence wasn't an oversight, it was erasure. The worst part wasn't the apron or the basement or even the missing name, it was the silence. Not one person asked where I'd gone. Not my sister, not my neighbors, not even Tommy's best friend, who once rode in the back seat of my car to Little League. They all saw me disappear, and nobody cared enough to follow. So I sliced sandwiches and poured water into pitchers because that's what good mothers do. We keep our heads down, we don't make scenes. But with every plate stacked, a question hammered deeper. What would happen if I stopped being invisible? The hotel room was small, tucked at the far end of a hallway where the carpet smelled faintly of bleach and old perfume. My window faced the parking lot, not the garden, but that suited me just fine. I needed distance from the twinkling lights, from the laughter spilling through the reception hall I had left behind. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, still wearing the navy dress and the coral polish that was supposed to match the wedding colors. My hands shook as I unclipped the apron and folded it neatly, laying it across the chair as if it belonged to someone else's life. The silence inside the room was heavy, but not cruel like the silence in the church basement. This silence gave me room to breathe. I poured a glass of water from the courtesy pitcher and stared at the condensation running down the sides, trying to ground myself. My phone glowed on the nightstand, the contacts list waiting. For years, I had been the one everyone called. Rides, money, last-minute rescues. Tonight, for the first time, it would be my turn to dial. I pressed the florist's number first. My voice was calm, polite, professional, the way I had learned to be as a school secretary when parents came storming into the office. The memorial garden arrangement will not be needed tomorrow, I said. Please cancel the order. The woman on the other end hesitated, confused, but she agreed. One call, and the future shifted slightly. Next, the musicians. I imagined the string quartet polishing their instruments, ready to play light-hearted melodies for a brunch I would no longer host. Your services will not be required, I told them. Again, confusion, a polite protest about contracts, but I stood firm. Consider this your official notification. My third call was the hotel banquet manager. The farewell brunch has been canceled, I said. Please inform the guests. I could hear papers rustling, the shuffle of someone trying to rearrange schedules. For once, it wasn't my problem. By the time I ended the last call, my pulse had steadied. It was a strange relief, as if each cancellation peeled away a layer of invisibility. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't demanding recognition. I was simply refusing to provide what had been taken for granted. I opened my laptop, its familiar hum filling the room. The receipts folder waited on the desktop, thick with digital proof. Every invoice, every payment confirmation. $15,000 for the venue, $3,000 for catering, $2,000 for the photographer who hadn't captured a single image of me, $500 for flowers. Each line item was another brick in the invisible wall I had built around myself, a wall of sacrifice that no one noticed until I tore it down. I began drafting emails, each one clipped and businesslike. To whom it may concern, due to unforeseen circumstances, Sunday's brunch event has been canceled. Please consider this your official notice. Send. To the florist, deliveries scheduled for tomorrow are no longer required. Thank you for your service. Send. To the quartet, your performance is canceled. Compensation will be settled per contract terms. Send. With each press of the send button, a soft whoosh carried part of my burden into the ether. I thought of all the times I had stayed up late ironing Tommy's shirts for job interviews, of the nights I had waited for him to come home safe, of the overtime hours logged so his tuition checks wouldn't bounce. None of those efforts had been announced with fanfare. They had been quiet, unseen. Tonight, I chose to let my silence be loud. Around midnight, I pushed back from the desk. My body ached from standing in that basement kitchen all day, from holding myself upright while people ignored me. I slipped off my shoes, massaging the tender spots on my heels. In the mirror above the dresser, I saw a woman who looked older than she had yesterday. But there was something steadier in her eyes, too. I thought of the moment I had walked upstairs and spoken into the microphone, canceling the brunch. It hadn't been rage that carried me, but clarity. I had been invisible long enough. People only noticed absence when it cost them something. Tomorrow, when they woke to find their flowers missing and their musicians silent, they would finally realize what my presence had meant. Sleep came in fits, broken by the ring of my phone. I let it buzz on the nightstand, refusing to answer. Sarah's mother called first, then my sister, then finally Tommy. Each voicemail stacked like an accusation. They wanted to know why I had canceled everything, but none of them asked the question that mattered, why I had been banished to the basement in the first place. At dawn, I pulled open the curtains. The parking lot was nearly empty, dew glistening on windshields. A young couple walked hand in hand toward their car, laughing, carefree. I wondered if Sarah and Tommy had looked like that once, before obligations and expectations hardened them. My chest tightened, but I shook the thought away. I could not rewrite their choices. I could only write my own. I packed slowly, folding the navy dress into the suitcase with deliberate care. It had been meant for joy, but it would carry a different memory now. The moment I realized that sacrifice without respect is just servitude. I tucked the receipts folder inside, heavy with numbers that told a story no one wanted to hear. Driving home, I took the long route through town. Past the elementary school, where I had volunteered in Tommy's classroom. Past the baseball field, where I'd cheered every Saturday for 6 years. Past the ice cream shop where we had celebrated every birthday with sticky smiles and brain freezes. Each landmark was a testament to the mother I had been, present, devoted, reliable. And yet, none of those investments had protected me from being erased on the most important day of his life. By the time I reached my driveway, the sun was high, warming the faded siding of my small house. My garden waited, weeds curling around the edges of flower beds I had neglected while planning someone else's perfect weekend. I left the suitcase by the door and wandered into the backyard. The soil was damp, rich, forgiving. I sank my hands into it, pulling weeds until my fingernails were dark with earth. For the first time in months, I was doing something that fed me instead of draining me. Later, as I washed the dirt away, my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. Tommy's voice filled the voicemail, tight and controlled. "Mom, we need to talk. Sarah's family is furious. You embarrassed us. Call me back." Not one word about how I was feeling. Not one question about whether I was okay. just fury at the disruption of a brunch. My heart squeezed, but instead of breaking, it hardened. If he could not see me, I would make myself visible in other ways. I spent the afternoon at the kitchen table, spreading out the receipts like cards in a game only I could win. $37,000. More than 8 months of my salary. More than I had ever spent on myself in a lifetime. And tucked among the charges, one that burned hotter than the rest, a $500 spa visit. Preampering for the bride tribe, complete with heart emojis in the note. They had used my card without asking, celebrating themselves with money I hadn't consented to spend. The betrayal cut deeper than the basement exile. It proved what I had suspected. To them, I was a resource, not a person. A wallet with no boundaries, a laborer with no voice. I slid the spa receipt to the top of the pile, its sharp edges pricking my fingertips. A line had been crossed. They thought I would never push back. They were wrong. The sun set, streaking the kitchen walls with orange light. I gathered the receipts, clipped them together, and placed them inside a folder labeled simply, Wedding. Tomorrow, when Tommy came, I would show him. Not to beg, not to plead, but to tell the truth. My role was changing. I was no longer the invisible worker behind the scenes. I was the mother of the groom, and my silence was officially over. By noon the next day, his car pulled into my driveway. Through the lace curtains, I watched him step out, adjusting his shirt as though straightening fabric could tidy up the mess we were in. It was the sedan I had co-signed 2 years earlier when his transmission failed. I had written the check that saved it, the same way I had written every check that had paved his way into adulthood. Now the vehicle gleamed like new, a symbol of all the things he could keep spotless while our bond rusted beneath neglect. Tommy paced on the porch, phone pressed to his ear. His mouth moved quickly, his free hand slicing the air as though swatting away invisible flies. He didn't notice me watching. I saw the boy he once was, the one who used to tug nervously at his hair before a baseball game. Now he was a man, married, collared, tethered to obligations that seemed to have no room for me. I opened the door before he could knock. The screen door banged lightly against its frame, a hollow sound that echoed in my ribs. He spun around, surprise flashing across his face. Perhaps he had expected to find me crumpled in grief, swollen-eyed, begging for forgiveness. Instead, I stood steady, the navy dress replaced by simple slacks and a clean blouse. No apron, no costume of servitude, just me. "Mom," he began, voice already sharpened with accusation. "What were you thinking? Not, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'I'm sorry.' Just the blunt question of how my choices had affected his weekend." "Come inside," I said evenly. My voice didn't rise, didn't tremble. It was the tone I once used at the school office when angry parents stormed in demanding answers. Calm steel. I stepped aside, and after a pause, he followed. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon soap from the scrubbing I had done earlier, a nervous habit that left my knuckles raw. I reached for the coffee pot, muscle memory guiding me through motions I had practiced 1,000 mornings. I poured 2 mugs, black with a splash of milk, the way he liked it. I set one before him on the table where I had once helped him practice multiplication, where we had decorated cookies, where birthdays had been celebrated with mismatched candles. Now the surface was bare except for the folder of receipts lying like a silent witness. He wrapped his hands around the mug but didn't drink. His jaw was tight. "Sarah's family is furious. People flew in for the brunch. You embarrassed us." I sat opposite him, folding my hands. "Embarrassed?" I asked. "Did it embarrass you when I was shoved into a basement kitchen during your vows? Did it embarrass you when my name was erased from the program I paid for, or did you not notice?" His eyes darted downward. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. "It wasn't like that," he muttered. "Sarah just wanted everything to be perfect. Her parents, there were expectations." I slid the folder across the table. The cardboard rasped against the wood, the sound startling in the quiet. "Look," I said simply. He hesitated. Then curiosity, or guilt, pushed his hand forward. He unclipped the fastener. Receipts spilled out in orderly stacks, each one carrying a number that could not be softened by excuses. 15,000 for the venue, 3,000 for catering, 2,000 for a photographer who hadn't aimed his lens at me once. 500 for flowers arranged under someone else's name. Tommy's brow furrowed deeper with every page. His shoulders slumped. This is more than I make in months. 37,000, I said. 8 months of my salary. Savings I scraped together for my retirement, for emergencies, for a future I thought might still include me. He kept flipping until his hand froze. The spa receipt, $500 for massages and manicures, a note scribbled with hearts, preampering for the bride tribe. His lips parted, shame flooding his expression. What's this? That, I said, my voice tight, is what your wife and her friends charged to my card the day before the wedding. While I was at home cooking food for their rehearsal dinner, they were pampering themselves with money they never asked to borrow. I didn't know, he whispered. No, you didn't, because you never asked. You never wondered how I managed, whether I could afford it. You never asked if I wanted to be more than the woman footing the bill. He lifted his head. His eyes were glossy, but defiant. I never asked you to pay for all this. You never asked me not to, I snapped, my voice sharper than I expected. And you never said thank you either. The words cut the air cleanly. He leaned back, blinking. For years, I had filled silences with reassurances, smoothed his mistakes with comfort. Now I let the silence grow, heavy and undeniable. The clock on the wall ticked each second louder, measuring the gap between us. Finally, he tried again. Sarah was stressed. Her family wanted things a certain way. I was trying to keep the peace. And where was my peace? I asked. Where was my dignity? You let them treat me like a servant, Tommy. Your mother. I poured every ounce of myself into that day, and you couldn't even make sure I had a seat. His face twisted. You're blowing this out of proportion. Weddings are complicated. Respect isn't complicated. My voice was firm now, unshakable. Love isn't supposed to erase. It's supposed to honor. You failed me, Tommy. The accusation hung between us. He looked down at the folder again, fingers brushing the paper as though searching for words in the ink. What do you want from me? He asked finally, his voice small. It was the wrong question. My throat tightened with memories of the boy who once climbed onto my lap to show me a scraped knee, who once carved his initials into the oak tree while I scolded him for scarring the bark. That boy would have known what I wanted without asking. But the man before me was too wrapped in loyalty to everyone but me. I don't want anything, I said quietly, though my voice didn't waver. I wanted to be treated like your mother, not your bank account. I wanted inclusion instead of invisibility, respect instead of tolerance. But since none of that is possible, I want only this, for you to be happy with the choices you've made, every single one of them. He stared at me, stricken. I don't know how we got here. I do, I said. Every time I stayed silent, every time I signed another check, every time I accepted being erased. He rubbed his forehead. His shoulders sagged. For a moment, I thought he might cry, but instead, he pushed back his chair abruptly, the legs screeching against the tile. I should go. Take the folder, I said, nodding toward it. It's your story too. He hesitated, then slid it under his arm. At the door, he stopped. Mom, But whatever words he wanted collapsed in his throat. He left, the screen door slamming shut like a gavel. I stayed at the table long after, the coffee gone cold, the room echoing with silence that felt different this time. Not the silence of erasure, but the silence of release. Grief rose, hot and sharp. But beneath it was something sturdier. Peace. Not joy, not forgiveness, not yet, but peace, the kind that comes from finally saying what should have been spoken years ago. I looked around the kitchen, mismatched chairs, chipped paint, the small window over the sink that framed a patch of garden. This house wasn't grand. It wasn't polished like Sarah's parents' place, but it was mine. For the first time, that felt like enough. That evening, I cooked dinner just for me. Not Tommy's favorite meatloaf. Not a quick sandwich made while working late to fund his dreams. Just salmon with lemon and herbs, roasted vegetables, and a glass of wine I had been saving for some undefined special occasion. Sitting at my own table, savoring food chosen only for me, felt like an act of rebellion and rebirth. The phone buzzed relentlessly. Sarah's mother. My sister. Friends whose whispers already carried down Main Street. I silenced it all. The only sound I wanted was the crackle of vegetables in the oven, the clink of my fork against porcelain. After dinner, I stepped into the garden. The evening air was cool, fragrant with earth. I watered flowers I had planted but neglected, watching droplets slide down petals like jewels. For once, the garden wasn't backdrop for someone else's party. It was mine, a sanctuary of soil and sky. Church bells tolled in the distance. I thought of the sanctuary where I'd once sung hymns with Tommy pressed against my side, of the oak tree where he had smiled for photographs that excluded me. Then I thought of the folder now under his arm, proof of every invisible sacrifice. Maybe he would study it, maybe he wouldn't. Either way, I had placed the truth in his hands. The sky deepened to indigo. I whispered into the night, words I had longed to hear, but finally gave myself. You matter. For the first time in years, I believed them. The days after Tommy left my kitchen stretched like long corridors with no doors. Every morning, I woke to a new string of voicemails, each one harsher than the last. My sister's voice cracked with disbelief. How could you do this to him? Neighbors spoke in low tones about embarrassment, as if my refusal to stay invisible had been more scandalous than the way I was treated. Even friends from church, women I'd baked casseroles beside, urged me to apologize. Their messages came heavy with sighs. It's better to keep the peace, they said. But I was tired of being the only one asked to sacrifice peace. Sarah's mother's words cut deepest. Her voicemail arrived late at night, her tone sweet but lined with venom. Contracts are binding. You've humiliated our family. We'll be forced to consider legal action. She didn't call me by name, didn't call me Mrs. or Mom, just you, as though I were a problem to be solved. 2 days later, an envelope slid under my door. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single sentence printed in thick black ink. You'll regret this. My hand shook as I held the paper. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Fear pressed against my ribs, colder than the church basement. I checked the locks twice before bed, drew the curtains tight. Sleep came in fragments, broken by jolts awake. I tried to hold myself together with chores. I scrubbed the counters until my skin burned, folded laundry that was already folded, rearranged canned goods in the pantry like soldiers in rows. Movement dulled the noise inside my head, but when the phone rang again, another demand, another scolding, the walls seemed to close in. On the third night, I found myself at the kitchen table long after midnight, head in my hands, the receipt spread like a mosaic of my own foolishness. $37,000 in neat columns, but not a single line that proved love. I wondered if I had wasted my life's work, if invisibility was all I'd ever be given in return. Tears slid silently down my face, hot against the cool paper. The next morning, as I moved through the fog of exhaustion, the phone rang once more. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the screen showed a name I hadn't seen all week. Pastor Ruth. Something inside me shifted. I answered. Her voice came steady, the kind of calm that could anchor a storm. I heard pieces of what happened, she said. Come by the church tomorrow. The sanctuary will be quiet. We can talk. For a moment, shame rose like bile. I wanted to refuse, to stay hidden, but something in her tone left no room for retreat. The next afternoon, I drove to the church. The parking lot was nearly empty, the building hushed. I stepped inside, my heels tapping against stone, each echo reminding me I still existed. Sunlight spilled through stained glass, casting pools of color across the pews. Pastor Ruth sat near the front, hands folded over her Bible. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the polite curve of lips I'd grown used to, but a welcome that reached her eyes. Sit with me, she said. I slid into the pew. For a while, we said nothing. The silence wasn't heavy like at home. It breathed. Finally, I whispered, They think I ruined everything. Her head tilted. And what do you think? I stared at the beams of light spilling through crimson glass. Words came slowly. I think I've spent decades shrinking. I think I gave until I was hollow. And when I finally said no, they painted me selfish. Her gaze held mine. Boundaries feel like betrayal to those who profit from your silence. The truth landed sharp, but it steadied me. My throat tightened. They've called me ungrateful, threatened lawsuits, even Tommy. He looks at me like I've broken something beyond repair. She reached into her bag and drew out a slim booklet. Legal resources, guidelines on property, power of attorney, financial rights. She slid it across the pew. Knowledge is armor, she said. You don't have to fight with rage. Stand with clarity. You gave more than anyone could demand. That's history. Now protect your future. I traced the booklet's cover. Its paper felt cool, solid, like a key I didn't know I needed. We sat in silence again. Dust motes swirled in the light. Somewhere above us, the old organ pipes groaned faintly in the wind. I remembered singing hymns here, with Tommy's small body pressed against mine, his young voice rising with mine in harmony. Grief welled sharp and sudden, but Pastor Ruth placed a gentle hand over mine. You are not invisible, she said softly. Not to God, not to me, and not to yourself, if you choose differently. When I left the church, the air felt clearer. I clutched the booklet like a passport to a country where worth was measured not by sacrifice, but by dignity. That evening, Sarah's aunt called. Her words were dipped in false courtesy. Perhaps if you apologize publicly, we can smooth this over. People would forgive you if you admit you overreacted. I almost laughed. My voice came steady. No, I ended the call. The syllable echoed in my kitchen like thunder. Still, doubt clung. That night, I dreamed of the oak tree. Tommy at 12, carving his initials while I scolded him. In the dream, the bark bled where the knife cut deep. I woke with a start, heart racing, sweat dampening my pillow. The following morning, I opened my laptop. The folder of receipts blinked on the screen, daring me. My finger hovered over delete, tempted to erase the evidence of my humiliation. But I stopped. Those papers were proof, not of weakness, but of labor, of love, of boundaries broken. I saved them to a flash drive, tucking it into a drawer, a quiet act of preservation. Later that day, Tommy called. I didn't answer, letting his words fall into voicemail. His voice cracked with strain. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. Sarah's furious. Her parents are talking about cutting ties. I'm stuck in the middle. I don't want to lose you. I listened twice, then a third time. He hadn't said sorry. He hadn't admitted wrong. But there was a tremor in his voice, the echo of the boy who once believed, I was his whole world. For the first time since the wedding, hope stirred. Not hope for things to return as they were, but hope that I wasn't entirely erased. That night, I slept without waking in terror. Sunday morning, I carried my coffee to the porch swing. The booklet from Pastor Ruth lay open on my lap, its pages crisp, its words practical and empowering. The chain creaked as I rocked, the air cool against my skin. A neighbor waved as she passed with her dog, and for once I didn't avert my eyes. I lifted my hand in return, present, unhidden. The phone still buzzed, the whispers still swirled. But beneath the noise, something sturdier took root. I had bent low, nearly broken. Yet with one hand extended in kindness and a booklet of knowledge in my lap, I found my spine again. I wasn't finished. I was only beginning to stand. The booklet from Pastor Ruth sat on my nightstand like a lantern in the dark. Every morning I woke with it beside me, its dog-eared pages reminding me that knowledge wasn't just information. It was protection. For days, I read and reread passages about contracts, property rights, financial safeguards. Each paragraph steadied me, replacing panic with clarity. The phone kept buzzing. Sarah's mother left another message about irreparable reputational damage. My sister pleaded for me to just say sorry and make it all go away. Tommy's calls grew more desperate, but still no apology. Just, "You've made things complicated. Sarah's parents don't trust you anymore. You've put me in a terrible position." The words stung, but they also revealed the truth. He wanted me pliant, not present, invisible again. But I wasn't going back. By the following week, whispers in town had swelled into gossip. At the grocery store, heads turned. Some eyes held pity, others scorn. A few women looked at me with something else, recognition. I noticed them hesitating at the end of aisles, as if they wanted to say me too, but didn't dare. One evening, I received an invitation I hadn't expected, the church council meeting. Pastor Ruth had mentioned my situation, and the council wanted to hear both sides. My first instinct was dread, but then I remembered the flash drive tucked in my drawer, every receipt lined up like soldiers. If they wanted both sides, they would get them. I dressed carefully that night, not the navy silk dress that had been tarnished with humiliation. I chose a simple blouse and pressed slacks, clothes that spoke of steadiness, not spectacle. The council gathered in the fellowship hall, the same place where I'd once ladled soup at community dinners. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum as people settled. Sarah's parents were there. Her mother in a stiff blazer, her father with his jaw set tight. Tommy sat between them, shoulders hunched, eyes shadowed. The air was thick with anticipation. Pastor Ruth opened the meeting, her voice calm. "We are here to seek clarity and understanding. Let each person speak with respect." Sarah's mother rose first, papers in hand. "We suffered humiliation," she declared. "Our guests were left without brunch, without flowers, without music. The community has judged us because of her reckless behavior." She gestured toward me without naming me, as though I were still an object rather than a person. Murmurs rippled through the room. I felt the old urge to shrink, to apologize. Instead, I stood. My legs trembled, but my voice did not. "I did cancel the brunch," I said. "I did stop the deliveries, but I want you to understand why." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, the same one I had handed to Tommy days before. $37,000. That's how much I spent to give my son and his bride the day they wanted. Venue, catering, photography, flowers. And not once was I acknowledged. Not once was my name included. Instead, I was handed an apron and sent to the basement. Gasps circled the room. I laid the receipts on the table in neat rows. "This is not exaggeration. These are facts. And among them is this." I held up the spa receipt. $500 charged to my card without permission for Sarah and her friends to pamper themselves while I worked overtime to pay for their celebration. Sarah's mother's face flushed. She sputtered something about misunderstandings, about stress. But the evidence spoke louder than her polished words. Council members leaned forward, whispering to one another. Tommy's eyes dropped to the floor. He didn't defend me, but he didn't defend them either. That silence, for once, worked in my favor. I took a breath. I am not here to beg for sympathy. I am here to say this. Invisibility has a cost. For years, I gave quietly, thinking that was love. But when kindness is treated as obligation, when generosity is met with erasure, silence becomes complicity. I refuse to be complicit in my own erasure anymore. The room was still. I heard the hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint shuffle of someone's shoe. One of the council members, a woman who had taught Sunday school with me years ago, spoke. I didn't know, she said softly. We all saw you disappear that day, and none of us asked why. I'm sorry. Her words cracked something open. Another woman nodded, her voice trembling. I know what it's like to be treated as if your labor doesn't count. Thank you for saying this out loud. Sarah's father cleared his throat, but his bluster faltered. He muttered about misunderstandings, about moving forward. Sarah's mother pursed her lips, clearly furious, but she said nothing more. When the meeting ended, people filed out in hushed groups. Some avoided my eyes. Others gave small nods of respect. Pastor Ruth squeezed my hand. You stood in truth, she whispered. Outside, the night air was cool. I looked up at the church steeple, the same one I had stared at through tears as I arranged sandwiches in the basement. Tonight, it stood above me not as a symbol of exile, but of witness. The next morning, something shifted. At the grocery store, a woman I barely knew touched my arm. I heard what you said, she whispered. You were brave. Another left a note on my porch. Thank you for reminding us we're more than what we provide. Words spread faster than any gossip Sarah's family could spin. My story became a mirror others held up to their own. And though whispers of criticism still lingered, they were no longer the only voices. A week later, Tommy came by. He looked tired, older. He carried the folder under his arm, the papers now creased from handling. Mom, he said, his voice rough. I've been thinking. About what you said. About what those receipts mean. I can't defend what happened. I don't know how to make it right. I studied his face, the boy I once knew, and the man he was becoming colliding in the lines of his brow. The first step, I said gently, is to see me. Not just as the person who fixes things, as your mother, as a woman who deserves respect. He nodded slowly. It wasn't an apology yet, but it was the beginning of one. That night, I sat on my porch swing, the booklet still on the table beside me. The air was crisp, stars scattered above. For years, I had measured love by what I gave, by how much of myself I erased. Now I understood something deeper. Real love requires space for both people to exist fully. I rocked gently, the chain creaking. My hands felt lighter, my spine straighter. I had faced the council, faced the town, faced my own son with truth. I wasn't invisible anymore. And I knew this was only the start. Months passed, and the storm softened. The town's whispers moved on to new scandals, but the people who mattered most had not forgotten. Some offered quiet nods of respect when they saw me at the market. Others left small notes in my mailbox, confessions of their own invisibility. My story had cracked something open in more than just me. Tommy visited more often. At first, his words stumbled, tangled in shame and excuses. But little by little, he began to see me. He stopped asking what I could pay for and started asking how I was doing. He sat at my kitchen table again, not as a man demanding, but as a son relearning. It was awkward, halting, imperfect, but real. Sarah stayed distant, her pride too thick to pierce quickly. Yet when Grace was born, she sent me a card. It was formal, stiff, the kind that thanked me for support without naming what had happened. But tucked inside was a picture of the baby, tiny fingers curled tight. That was acknowledgement enough for now. I knitted a blanket for Grace, soft yellow, edged with small flowers, each stitch a quiet declaration that love could continue without erasure. When I held her for the first time, her tiny weight resting against me, I felt a line break and reform. I was not just a bank account. I was Gamma, her grandmother, visible in the circle of her life. At home, I gave myself new beginnings. I took classes at the community college, learned Spanish words that rolled strange and beautiful on my tongue, studied art history like I'd once dreamed in my youth. Surrounded by other late bloomers, I discovered laughter that wasn't born of obligation. I planned a trip to Spain, my first passport stamp earned not for someone else's dream, but my own. Travel did what years of sacrifice never could. It reminded me who I was. I walked through museums where no one knew my story, ate tapas at tiny counters where strangers spoke to me without expectation. I stood in plazas under wide skies and realized independence fit me better than invisibility ever had. When I returned, sun-kissed and steady, the mirror reflected someone I almost didn't recognize. A woman whose shoulders weren't bowed, whose eyes no longer searched for approval in every corner. Thanksgiving came again, and this time Tommy invited me openly. I arrived to find a place set at the table, not in the kitchen. Grace toddled toward me, arms open, calling me by name. Sarah was polite, careful. But when I gave Grace a small stuffed llama from my travels, Sarah smiled faintly. A fragile bridge, but a bridge nonetheless. Later, as I walked to my car, Tommy followed. "You seem different," he said. His voice was low, almost reverent. "I am different," I told him. "I love you, Tommy. I always will. But I love myself now, too. And that changes everything." He nodded, eyes wet. For the first time in years, we hugged. Long, unhurried, real. I drove home to my quiet house, the porch light glowing like a sentinel. Inside, mismatched furniture waited, familiar and mine. I poured a glass of wine, sat at the table, and let the peace settle deep. I had been invisible. I had been erased. But by standing in truth, by setting boundaries, I had reclaimed my seat. Not just at a table, but in my own life. And maybe that's the lesson. Love without respect is only noise. Real love allows you to be seen. So if you're listening now, ask yourself, what would you do if the people closest to you demanded your silence? Would you keep shrinking, or would you finally take your seat? Thank you for being here, for hearing my story. If it touched something in you, share your own. And if you'd like to walk with me through the next chapter, join our family at Roots and Secrets. Like, comment, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. You never know, your story might be the one that helps someone else find their voice.